on this 9-mile hike around reservoirs and moorland edges, we will encounter 5 terrifying tales of human disaster and tragedy. And it might lead you to ask the question, is this moor cursed? As I hike along the edge of this reservoir on the outward leg, our first tale relates to the plantation that you can see up there on the hillside beside me. Now, that is private land, so we won't be going up there, but it won't stop me telling you this tale. The plantation is known as Billojacks Plantation, and that slightly odd name is remembering a pub, the Moorcock Inn, that stood up there until the 1930s, when it was demolished by the local water authority. But just over 100 years before that, on the 2nd of April 1832, the pub was the scene for a horrendous murder that has never been solved in nearly 200 years. This odd name, Billojacks, comes from the landlord, William Bradbury, Bill Bradbury, and his father, Jack. And on the 2nd of April 1832, Bill was 84 by that stage, and his son, a local gamekeeper, Tom, set off that morning with his friend Reuben to walk down to the local village to get groceries. Now, on the way, he met Bill, who was heading back, and they gave him the key so he could let himself into the pub. Short time after that, Tom and Reuben ran into a group of 3 men by the side of the lane, and one of them asked them the question in an Irish accent, don't know if that's significant, directions to the nearby town, how long it was going to take. This unsettled Tom a little, and he hurried down to the village to get the groceries, said goodbye to Reuben, and then hurried back to the pub. The next morning, Bill's granddaughter Amelia went up to the pub, and what she found was truly horrific. Tom was laying on the ground floor in a pool of blood. He was alive, but incomprehensible. A trail of blood led her upstairs to where she found her grandfather Bill soaking in blood in his bed. Amelia ran half a mile or so to the nearest neighbour. A message was sent through. The local doctor arrived at the scene. He described it as the like of which he'd never seen before. Such was the savagery of the extent of Bill and Tom's injuries. They both died the next day. And this murder mystery has never been solved in nearly 200 years. As you can imagine, a 200-year-old unsolved murder has been manna from heaven since the age of the internet. And you'll find loads of theories from amateur investigators on YouTube about what happened at Billojacks nearly 200 years ago. You'll also see plenty of examples of them all trespassing up there on the site of the pub, where you can still apparently find the cellars, which is all that remains of it. There, that is the edge there of Billojacks Plantation. I suppose if I was to join in with the antics of all these other amateur YouTube investigators, I'd now be adding some sort of slightly sinister filter to the footage, possibly some rain, some suitably atmospheric sort of weather condition type sound effects, and possibly some ominous music. Wouldn't I? Once we get to the end of this last reservoir here, there's a track, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, that heads up, and our onward route is up onto this gritstone edge. I know us human beings need the water that comes from these reservoirs, but it's always nice to leave them behind and get out into the more natural open landscape. Impossible time of year in the north to know what to wear on a long hike. It was cold and rainy on the outward sort of leg, the initial leg. Now it's absolutely baking. I doubt you'll be able to see it on the GoPro. I'll get the phone. But up there is the Trinicle, a sort of quite striking rock feature. Handy for us to spot that from down here because we need to pass that on our onward route. A lot of tree planting gone on in these sort of areas over the last 10-15 years. I guess it's a good thing. It will help with water retention. I just hate the plastic tubes. Sorry about all the sweat. I last did this route back in 2016, and as far as I remember, the next bit we've got to do a bit of a scrambly ascent up that gully to get to the ridge. Well, it's definitely one of those northern England late spring days. The heavens just opened and now they've stopped and the sun is coming out. Coat on, coat off. I was a bit worried about the tone of this video, getting it tonally right. With these tragic stories that I'm telling you today, it's not the normal sort of fare. If I get this wrong tonally, and there's a bit at the end particularly that worries me, please let me know in the comments down below and I won't do it again. But obviously please be kind to me. It's right what they say, the memory does cheat. I completely forgot about this fantastic waterfall. Now, somewhere as I come along here, I've got to find the way across so that we can climb up the other side and get onto the edge of the moor. I think this is it. Right. It's the fear of slipping. That's very slippery. Right, I've got a foot in there. Now onto that one. Hopefully that's the end of that sort of thing. Nice to be gaining some height now. If I was a younger man, I'd have to get down onto that ledge, but I'm not. It is really spectacular. I don't think we're far now from the Trinicle. There it is, and you can see, excuse my GoPro pointing, you can see the ledge down there that whippersnappers use to scramble down there, and then they jump from there to there. If I were a younger man, etc, etc. Quite a place. I'm really enjoying being back here after, you know, quite a long time. Can see Billojacks plantation over there quite clearly as well. I'll get me phone. Right, we're just following the edge now, probably for what am I saying? We, it's me that's doing all the work here. But I've got, I think, about 2 miles to go till we get to our next venue for a story. You won't be able to see it, but there's quite a striking view of modern Manchester down there in the distance. So many skyscrapers now. I'll get me phone. And here it is, can you see? I'd underestimated how far there was between each of our horror stories today, but here I am at the Ashway Cross, and I'm sure you'll agree it's a slightly sinister looking thing. It commemorates the accidental shooting of MP James Platt in 1857. I'm sorry, I don't know what party he represented. I suppose it was the Tories or the Liberals back then. Very tragic incident. It was an accidental gun discharge, apparently, and the person who pulled the trigger was Josiah Radcliffe. Obviously accidentally pulled the trigger, I should clarify, and he was the mayor of Oldham. I'll leave the conspiracies to the YouTube experts on this one. Apologies, the fake drone footage accompanying that segment was probably a bit wibbly wobbly. It's now really windy, as well as everything else. Coat back on. Some people have arrived at the Ashway Cross. And just to show you around here, this is the route ahead. We're going to go basically all the way around here, all along that edge there, around the other side, and then we'll get to the location for our next tale of horror. I don't know if any of you noticed, but on a video I did earlier in the year, an American was furious with me for describing a mountain shelter as a shelter. It was just 4 low walls, obviously no roof. He really couldn't get his head around that. This one would make his blood boil, I suspect. Imagine you have watched my crossing of the moor with some sort of musical accompaniment. I hope you can hear me okay. We're GoProing today, and I've now reached this valley with a lane leading down it, and this is the location for our next run of stories. In fact, we will relate all 3 stories from here. Our first 2 tales of terror have obviously been in the 19th century. The next one is taking us into the middle of the 20th. As I mentioned earlier, I do hope this slightly different format is working okay. I'm travelling light as well in terms of filming kit today. Just the GoPro and my phone. I've got the small fake drone V2 as well, but none of the rest of the paraphernalia. The last time I did that and asked, quite a few people said it was fine, so every now and then I guess it's fine. This top end of the valley is known as wilderness. Not a very flattering angle, but I'm going to shelter here. It's really windy to tell you this really tragic story. Now, many of our demographic will recall that the winter of 1963 was a very harsh one, and this awful event took place on the 23rd of January of that year. 4 climbers from the Manchester Gritstone Climbing Club set off to climb Wilderness Gully East. They ascended to approximately 200 feet up it in not the sort of conditions you're looking at on these overlays. You know, it was deep in snow and ice. One of the survivors, Alan Wheeler, reported that the 2 lead climbers were 60 feet above when he heard a crack and the shout of avalanche. Graham West, Michael Roberts and Alan Wheeler were knocked off and fell off the face here through tons of snow and ice. John Smith, the 4th member who avoided that, found Wheeler and managed to pull him out of the frozen debris. They searched but couldn't find West and Roberts. They went up to Chew House, where the reservoir keeper lived, and made contact with the police. But there was no luck finding them, and they called the search off later that night. The search resumed the next day, involving Royton Mountain Rescue, the RAF and the Army, a team of nearly 100 people, and the bodies of West and Roberts were found later that day. It went down as one of the worst avalanches in British history. A really tragic story, that one, and apologies if you could hear my notes rustling in the wind. Our next story also is linked to this trackway that we're walking down in the valley here, and it was on the 12th of December 2015, so we're in the 21st century now, that a cyclist discovered the body of a man laying in one of these laybys here. It took an incredible 13 months for the police to identify who this was. He didn't have anything on him in terms of identification, no wallet or phone, just some cash and medication. They got CCTV footage of him boarding a train in London and alighting at Manchester Piccadilly. On the 11th of December, it turned out that he'd walked into the pub in the village below this location and asked for directions to the top of the mountain. And he was seen later that day as well by some hikers heading up this track. In March of 2016, it was announced that toxicology had determined that the cause of his death was strychnine poisoning. But really weirdly, he did have a return ticket to London. Despite public appeals using the CCTV footage, nobody came forward to say that they knew this man. They discovered that he had a 10cm metal plate in his leg, and they were able to date that as having been put there sometime between 2001 to 2015. And that and the medication he had upon him linked him to Pakistan. They then trawled through all the flights into London from Lahore and found that he had boarded a plane in Lahore on the 10th of December. They finally found his passport and were able to identify him as 67-year-old David Lytton. To this day, they have not been able to determine why David Lytton chose to board a flight in Lahore on the 10th of December, fly to London, then catch a train to Manchester, then set off up here onto the moors looking for the top of the mountain. He had no links whatsoever with this area, and as I mentioned, he did have a return ticket, so we just don't know what happened there. It was a real modern-day mystery. I'm not sure which lay-by it is that he was found in, but I think, from what I've been able to see online, it was probably this one here. And his body was apparently sort of just laying straight, neatly, with hands by his side. And it's here, as we get down towards the lower level of the track, that we can see on the other side of the valley the location of our 5th and final tragic story. We're back in the 20th century, and it's the 1949 plane crash up there on Wimbury Stones. The flight left Belfast at 10:58 for Manchester, and contact was lost at 11:59, and the plane crashed 1 minute later. 29 passengers, 3 or 4 crew members, they're not entirely certain about that. It was a very difficult rescue mission, hampered by the remote location up there. 21 passengers died out of 29, and all of the crew died. So there were just 8 survivors. 5-year-old Stephen Evans and both of his parents were survivors, but his brother Roger died. Now, going back to the David Lytton mystery of 2015-2016, one of the theories that the police hatched during that investigation was that the man who came here to die linked to that plane crash. Stephen Evans, now an eminent professor of epidemiology, contacted the police to let them know that he was still alive. Hi, you all right? I am, yeah. And they were so close. That's Manchester there, which was their destination, just past the edge of the... Oh, this GoPro pointed is a nightmare. Just past the edge of that lip there. They were nearly there. That's 5 really tragic stories along the line of a walk of around 9 miles. Now, of course, I don't believe in curses. I chose that title for clickbait purposes, obviously. But it does seem an extraordinary thing that there's been so much awful stuff here in the last 200 years in such a condensed area. Cheers. I hope you found that interesting. Don't panic, it's not setting any precedents. I know it's been a bit different than the normal fare on the channel, and I'm sure we'll be back in some ancient history again next week. They've been difficult stories to tell. They are pretty awful, but I think the scenery has been fantastic despite the best efforts of the weather. Of course, the sun is coming out now. I'm nearly back at the car. Now, you may have noticed I haven't mentioned where we have been today, and there is a reason for that. There is actually a 6th story attached to this area, and it's very famous, very well known, extensively covered elsewhere, including here on YouTube. I decided not to go into it. I didn't see any need for it. I'll put a little thing up at the end to let you know where we've been. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, buy me a coffee, all the normal sort of stuff, and I'll see you again next week.